welcome to the Countryside Alliance Fringe meeting on the future of the countryside in the new Parliament. And we're thrilled you've all joined us today and what promises to be a highly entertaining and insightful discussion on the key issues concerning rural communities. The Countryside Alliance is committed to ensuring that rural voices are heard and understood, with a focus on these communities benefit the entire country through food production, landscape recovery and recreational enjoyment. So these are really key things that we want to see and promote in the countryside. Ahead of the general election, the Countryside Alliance released its own rural charter, which focuses on 4 key areas. Tackling rural crime, because while I appreciate crime in rural areas isn't as high as urban areas, the impact on rural communities is as great, if not greater, with the fear of crime and how that impacts on people. We were championing farmers and producers and the importance of local food production, sustainable food production. We were recognising the role of wildlife management and it's critical for increasing nature and biodiversity, and ensuring a connected countryside, which is covering better transport, digital connectivity and access to services. These are all issues that we must address if we want to see a thriving countryside and rural community and ensure it plays its part in the national economy. We are fortunate today to have an excellent panel of speakers, all of whom bring unique perspectives and expertise to the conversation. Well, when Joe joins us, we'll introduce him, but for the time being, he won the seat of Hexham in July, becoming the first Labour MP and the first non-Conservative MP for over 100 years. That's pretty much an accolade to him. Joe's already proven himself to be a strong advocate for rural issues in Parliament, having initiated debates on banking and the future of sheep farming. So it's good to hear those voices already being heard in Westminster. Next we welcome Lee Pitcher, the new elected MP for Doncaster East and Isle of Axel. Lee describes him first as an engineer first, the politician second. And he brings a wealth of experience to Westminster with work at Yorkshire Water, where he devised the land use strategy. Lee has been a passionate voice again for rural communities and has already addressed the Transport Minister about rural bus services and how can we connect our remote rural communities and making sure they are able to get to local towns and access services, which is fantastic. We also have Geraldine Scott, who's an award-winning journalist and senior political correspondent for The Times. Gerald's been a keen observer of all things rural and politics, so she'll bring some really good insight to what's been going on out there. She's also been an impressive career spanning the PA, the Yorkshire Post and The Times, and her insights will undoubtedly add a nice perspective today. And finally, we have Simon Lewis on the end here. Simon is a senior communications expert with a remarkable career in both business and politics, having served as official spokesperson for the Prime Minister Gordon Brown and for the late Her Majesty the Queen. So we have an illustrious company here. They bring a wealth of knowledge on communications and challenges facing rural issues. So thank you for coming. This is our great panel. We're going to kick off here with Lee and do you want to carry on?
I certainly can. So thank you so much for having me along here today. So I am, of course, a new Member of Parliament, and as you quite rightly said, my background over the last 25 years has been mainly in engineering. So I started as a sewer baiter, believe it or not. So I used to lift manholes and bait sewers to manage the rodent population in the sewer system, and then over the years worked my way up to be head of operations. And took over the land team. So Yorkshire Water is the second biggest landowner in the largest county in the country, in England. And I, with my team, and I have to say it was a team effort, managed land, and we looked at very much where we had too much water, too little water, too dirty water. So flooding, drought, pollution in particular, and how we could build resilience against flooding, protect ourselves when it comes to drought, but then also to look at how we cleaned up our ditches, dikes, rivers, seas, right the way out to the catchment and the ocean. But I also looked at different sustainable farming practices as well as part of that piece of work, particularly around new generation farming and bringing young adults through into the farming industry when we think about how desperately needed it is to inspire young adults to want to come into a career in farming as well. So I also, from a personal point of view, my wife and her family are from a farming background, so I have constant reminders every single day of the importance of farming, the countryside in particular. And when we talk about the Isle of Axel, it is a beautiful absolutely spectacular place to come and visit. So if you've not heard of it, and many people haven't, you really do need to come and visit Axome. It's the home of Epworth, the place where Methodism started, but a place where our countryside is in abundance, and it's just gorgeous to come and say hello and visit.
Thank you, Lee. Karen.
Hopefully that's working. Yes, it is. Thank you for having me, and thank you for coming. I think where this question kind of strikes me as most interesting politically at the moment is, Lee spoke a lot about his background there, but I think that there are a number of new MPs who are now going to be finding themselves representing rural or semi-rural constituencies that have been, Tory held for years, maybe forever, and that there is going to have to be an adjustment to how MPs serve those communities. And look, I'm purely politically focused here in kind of my work, but I started writing, must have been 2018, about what Labour will do with the countryside, because I thought there was clearly only one way to get into Downing Street, and that is by winning over those rural and semi-rural seats. And as not to say I told you so, but it has come to pass. And I think how those seats are now managed is going to be key. The new government talks about growth. Well, you cannot get growth across the country without ensuring that there is rural growth. When the last Tory government used to speak about levelling up, the riposte that I would often give if interviewing ministers about this is, well, that's fine, but you may be focusing on cities like Leeds and Manchester, but what about the rural communities? And I feel this quite keenly. I grew up in Norfolk, which is obviously very rural, and then spent a lot of time reporting on Yorkshire before moving to London, that very rural place. But it's key to me that there is not going to be success in the government's missions, the government's policies, and the aims to essentially make the country better without taking rural communities with it. And if it doesn't do that, it risks losing all of those rural and semi-rural seats that it has just gained. Basically, the proof will be in the pudding.
Thank you, Jared. Simon.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. In your very generous introduction, so you didn't mention that I also have a weekly podcast on BBC Sounds called When It Hits the Fan. I only mention that because we're going to broadcast it live from the conference this week. So if you've got any fan-hitting moments, do let me know at the end, because we're always looking for good copy. But so thank you for inviting me. I come at this in a quite specific way. I come at the whole question of rural communities and farming communities from the perspective of social mobility, because I feel very strongly personally about the importance of social mobility, partly because of my own life story, which I won't bore you with, but partly because I do two things. I chair a charity called Young Enterprise, which is a brilliant charity which helps kids in disadvantaged schools become kind of financially literate, such that when they leave school they are able to deal with kind of real life without just relying on exams. I'm also involved with a great charity which some of you may have heard of called Speakers for Schools, which was set up by Robert Peston, which goes also into very disadvantaged schools and tries to inspire kids to think that they can do whatever they want, but trying to inspire. There's a specific policy issue that we are developing. So let me just give you three data points which I think are very interesting. So 19% of rural youngsters apply for university. So the similar figure in towns and cities, you can guess, is 39%. In London, it's even higher than that. So to the extent that that's a measure of social mobility, that tells you something. Only 2% of kids from rural communities go on to a postgraduate degree or qualification. And if you think of how important it is now, if you can, to have a postgraduate qualification, I think it's quite significant. This is the thing that is a very Speakers for School issue. Less than 1 in 5, less than 20% of rural teenagers have access to structured work experience. I mean, there's a big difference between work experience where a friend of yours says, come and help out in a sweet shop, and work experience where you actually learn what it is that actually you may not want to do in your life, but at least you'll learn. I feel very strongly the structured work experience is a vital part of social mobility. So that's another constraint around the future. And then So 1 in 5 have access to it in rural areas, and nearly 40% in cities. So there's something very interesting. And then here's the last one: 51%, over half of youngsters in rural areas see high costs and the fear of moving to a city as a reason not to apply to university or to some form of education. So my view is that this government has a fantastic opportunity to deal head on with some of these social mobility issues. It doesn't kind of matter whether it's rural versus the cities, but one of the many myths I think that the Countryside Alliance is seeking to address is the idea that the countryside is for posh toffs. It's not. Countryside is where people go about their lives day to day, often in much worse conditions economically than in the big cities. So I've just got a few thoughts, and some of them are pretty obvious. But I mean, first of all, we've got to sort out the travel and transport situation. I mean, we did a study for Young Enterprise. Some of the kids who are on Young Enterprise programs, they do 12-hour days if they live outside a big city, just getting to and from college. I mean, that cannot be right. So that's just, we have to deal with the transport issue. Also, we have to deal with the youth exodus, where bright kids who do go away to college, university, very rarely come back. And if we want to find, and I agree with you, levelling up is a completely discredited phrase. It's not about levelling up, it's about ensuring that if kids want to come back after they've been at university, then they can do it, they can have affordable housing, they can live the life they want to without remaining in a city or in a town. The other thing I feel very strongly about is seasonal work. I mean, anyone who spends time in places, particularly kind of coastal places, I mean, seasonal work, kids being told they can only work from June to October isn't really right. And I think in Cornwall in particular, which I know quite well, there are quite a lot of enlightened employers who are now saying to young people, we'll employ you for the whole year. And that, I think, is something that we need to sort of make sure is probably put in place. Then there's the improved education experience, and again, I don't want to over-advertise Young Enterprise, but that's exactly what Young Enterprise does. It improves the education experience. And then let's make work experience a universal right. Let's make it, and again, this is something specific, I think, believe the Labour government could do, actually enact it, so that actually, statutory requirement to do 2 weeks of work experience just as a right is kind of built in. And finally, but this is a bigger issue, there just aren't enough large-scale kind of aware employers in these areas we're talking about who can deliver some of the stuff that we've been talking about. But that obviously has to do with the economic growth agenda that we've also no doubt going to hear about this conference. So thank you, Sarah and Mo, for convening this meeting, and I think it's very timely and quite optimistic that these changes should, over time, be in place.
Thanks, Simon. I mean, I find some of those figures quite startling. You were saying about access to education and people applying. If you could, sit down with Keir now and say one thing or make a difference with your people, what would you say? In relation to education, I think this work experience thing is incredibly important. I mean, the fact is that people who live in cities kind of take for granted that through contacts and other kind of methods you can just get work experience. I think it's really important. It also encourages employers to think constructively about young people. So I think I'd say, Keir, you've got a lot on your plate. Why don't you just do this and see how it goes? I mean, I know in the last government, Rishi Sunak floated this whole national service, and that was a little bit draconian, I think people felt. But what's a red herring? When you looked into what the details were, he was perhaps talking about politics as well. Yes.
I'll pick up on the opportunities for, because obviously that's a big part of the Labour Party's manifesto. It's a big part of Bridget's discussions that we're having at the moment. And my background is that I was homeless for a while as a child. My mum, sister, and I we lost our home, and we never lived on the streets, but we certainly we sofa surfed for about 14 months. And I know how challenging and how difficult it is when you come from, and I was very, very lucky. I had a very loving family, a loving mum who absolutely adored us and did everything for us, but we still lost our home. And I know how challenging it is to, even when you've got that stability in place with a sound sort of family background, to be able to then really do well at school and have the same opportunities as others to do well. And it takes an enormous amount of encouragement, and in my case from the school itself, to push me to be inspired to know that I could do just as well as other people and progress. So I totally get that, and I come from a very personal place. But then coming back to what that means from a farming community point of view, I can also see, or a countryside point of view, how challenging that can be. So I sit, and you'll realise I talk a lot about statistics, but also talk a lot about real stories. And I speak to farming communities now. I speak to my mother-in-law, and for her to have gone to school and to do GCSEs or O-levels at the time, and this is still exactly the same for many of the farming children that I meet, they have to get on a cycle and they have to cycle for an hour to get to school. And that in itself, at the start of the day and at the end of the day when it's dark, and that's really difficult and really challenging. So there is something about, I think you're quite right about transport, but there is also something about letting children become inspired by unlocking their potential, by giving them opportunities to do work experience in other places and knowing what the world is out there that they can go into.
Thank you, Joe.
Only to add that, I think I said at the beginning that I grew up in Norfolk, and we had a brilliant agricultural college, Eastern. I'm going to have got it wrong, but because I didn't go there, but some of my friends did. And only to say, Lee mentioned, Bridget's plan on for education and things like that, and I think that it is going to be extremely important to put these kind of places where they are needed, right? The data, it needs to be data driven. There is no point opening, for example, an agricultural college in, I don't know, I was going to say Hull, but I mean Hull can be pretty rural as well. But in a place that doesn't need it. So I think that it's all very well and perfectly reasonable and right to be saying, the education offer and apprenticeships is one of Bridget's big things as well, isn't it? It's going to be there, but targeting it where it's needed, and I think that only can then help people stay where they grow up and stay if they want to, and that's going to be key.
I think a lot of apprenticeships, and we've worked behind actually the gamekeeper apprenticeship, are land-based, and not everyone wants to work on the land. There needs to be a variety of jobs out there for people and apprenticeships, and I think non-land-based apprenticeships seem to be much more focused in urban areas, so it's a challenge there to make it attractive and provide those jobs. Right, we're going to open it up to the floor now. Does anyone have a question? So we'll start with the gentleman here. Good.
Sure. I'm Ant Reid from Labour Coast and Country. I'm wondering whether devolution is part of the answer. What's the future of the countryside in Parliament? Not just to combined authorities who understand their geography, but also hyper-devolution down to parish community councils, enabling but also giving them a duty to look after some transport issues, work with farmers on ditches for flooding. Is there any future in that in this Parliament?
Well, let's take a question of the other two, we'll take them in one go. So, gentleman here in the orange.
Yeah. So, school choice was something you didn't touch on in education. So, in the city, you can choose a school that's best for your child. In the school, in the countryside, there's usually only one school that you can go to that you can get a free bus place to get to. And then, but just something you said, how can we deal with that? And then something positive for the future. I think our mission for the green economy, essentially. So I visited the Isle of Axholme actually last year and saw some of the great work being done to use peatlands and for greenhouse gas removal and potential for growing miscanthus on the peatland. So I think there's opportunities for high tech jobs in the countryside that there haven't been before, that are really reliant on the green transition.
Gentleman right back there.
Yes, it's just on the question the first gentleman asked about. It's just building on the question that the first gentleman asked about devolution. Obviously, as well as combined authorities playing their part, should MPs do more to encourage combined authorities to develop rural growth plans and working with not just SMEs but also further education providers to make sure that we can achieve the social mobility in rural communities, especially rural communities that have pockets of poverty, like in County Durham and North Yorkshire.
Thank you. Lee, do you want to go first? And we can tackle all three in one go.
I'll certainly have a go. there has to be an opportunity in devolution, without a doubt. So I think when you talk about countryside voice and the voice of local people, and knowing what works for them and the cultures that they have and the identity that they have, that absolutely plays so well to a devolved area, a devolved community, and knowing what are the things that make people tick, and what would encourage them to stay in the countryside and work in the countryside and spend their social time in the countryside. So I thoroughly believe there is an opportunity there. And coming back to the point at the back, absolutely. So working with, for me, the South Yorkshire Rail Combined Authority, and thinking about what does a countryside or rural strategy look like, massively important, and what the key steps and milestones we need to put in place over the next 5 years to do that. And likewise, as things start to evolve for me in North Lincolnshire, which where the Isle of Axholme is, of course, I need to do exactly the same there. So absolutely, I think there's a huge opportunity. When it comes to transport as well, it's vital. So we know that our countryside communities, agricultural communities, often feel really quite isolated, and that in itself creates an extra challenge on top of the everyday, difficulties that we have in the countryside to deal with. So certainly, I think a devolved kind of government, devolved working helps with that and understands what we need to do, and people having a voice in the kind of transport that they need, and the buses that they need, and the routes that they need, absolutely important. I'm already talking to Oliver Coppard in my particular area around that, very important. So I come from, you mentioned engineering, I didn't talk about that at all in my opening, did I? So my background for the last 5-10 years has been much more engineering focused, but much more engineering focused working with land, so moving away from civils, so sort of hard engineering, to move into looking at how you work with nature, how you work with land, how you look at sustainable urban drainage systems. And I've been I work for Jacobs for the last sort of year of my life as the Director of Europe for Water and Environment. But I was looking at, 100 years in the future. I was looking at where water will be in the future or not, as the case may be. And I was looking at how you intervene by putting various engineering interventions in place to, help communities thrive and continue to thrive going forward into the future. In 5-year cycles, working back from 100 years in the future, what we needed to do. So I can tell you now, when I go out to schools, when I go out to colleges, when I go to other really excited institutions about engineering in a different world, I have never seen so much passion for what we need to do around climate change, particularly amongst young people. They are absolutely desperate to get involved in that world, and actually it's not mutually exclusive in terms of engineering, the future, inspiring young generations, and the opportunities for jobs in the countryside is huge, because working with land to prevent floods, working with land to ensure we don't have droughts, working with land to make sure that we can sustainably farm in the future and have the food produce that we need, plus renewables, which we've not talked about yet today, but I'm sure we might come on to. It's intrinsically linked, and I do absolutely see that there's a load of opportunity in that world. Really do. Have I missed anything there? Did I miss anything? School choice. School choice is a difficult one, actually, and I don't have the answer to that. So as a politician, I'm not going to try to make one up either. I'm starting as I mean to go on with all my integrity intact. So I don't know the answer to that at the moment, but you're quite right. Massively important. So it's one for me to think about. Yeah.
That's fair. Jerry?
I was very interested that you mentioned flooding and things like that there. Where I'm from, there was the floodplains, loads of floodplains in Norfolk. There's a need for new housing, so they put a load of houses on them, and guess what? They flood every year. And I think that this is where the new government may find some conflict, and it ties into the devolution point. That there are national demands, to build loads of houses, to get people housing. It's very important. There's demand to put some of those in rural areas, because that is important, that affordable housing is there for those people. I think the devolution element is very, very important, but not to I feel like I'm sitting here being like the harbinger of doom, sorry. But like where I see the upcoming conflict, because that's my job, to see where the conflict is coming and see what the stories might be, where I see the upcoming conflict with the devolution agenda is that actually the national priorities and the local priorities maybe do not always match up. And the big question for me will be, how far then does that devolution go? Who is actually holding the strings if, you know, national government are coming and saying your constituency actually needs 50,000 more houses and your rural communities need it, but your local representatives say no? Who wins out there? Is it the local politicians because the devolution agenda is very important, or is it Angela Rayner who has, you know, sat down in an interview with me and said, well, no, we're going to build 1.5 million homes over the course of 5 years? And I think there is a real inconsistency there, and I think realistically the answer is national government will always win out, but I don't think you can do the same thing. It's like two different sides of the same coin, right? It's not always going to work. So I think that's kind of a really fascinating thing, and it's going to take smart planning in order to not put it on the floodplains, and to kind of find those areas where it is appropriate. And I know that the party has spoken a lot about the grey belt, but what is that? What that is defined as, I think there is still a question mark over it. So I think basically what I'm trying to get at is that there are still a lot of unanswered questions about how these different competing priorities will be ironed out, who will ultimately make the decision, and how will that conflict be managed. Because the problem the party has had in the past, in my view, with rural communities is that the conflict has not been managed well. It's been very much this is what we're going to do, and have not taken into account the views or the intricacies, I suppose. Doesn't understand, the party hasn't always understood rural life. So it needs to be on listening mode if it's going to do that, but essentially it's going to be a bit of a you can't have everything you might want situation.
It's interesting, Joe, you pick up on the whole housing and flooding, and the MPPF consultation actually closes tomorrow. I'm sure you've done your submission, but actually when you read it and you talk about the grey belt, they are devolving all that information down to local authorities and leaving it up to local interpretation. So I think we're going to have a real mishmash of what that looks like and how that's interpreted, and what land's going to be green belt, what's going to be grey belt, and what's going to be built on. And I think we're going to end up with such a mess, and a number of, basically everything appeal planning decisions, and we're going to tie everyone up in court for the next few years. We're still not building any houses, and meanwhile, we see house prices go up, and people still being unaffordable for many people to come back to rural areas. So. If anyone wants to finish tonight, you can get it in for tomorrow. I'm sure I'd love to hear your views.
I think sorry, just on that though, community voice is massively important, isn't it? And it's at the moment where community voice gets involved in planning, along that process is probably some way a little bit down. So it's looking at where you get that community voice and engagement as early and upfront as possible, so you can smooth the way, I guess. So that absolutely needs to be taken into account in the consideration, I think, as well. Yeah.
Simon?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of max devolution. I think this country is still far too centralised. I think it doesn't work for a modern economic powerhouse we want to be. In fact, my old boss, number 10, Gordon Brown, has exactly the same view. And actually his view, fun enough, is that if you believe in the union, if you want to keep the union together, you want to go as max as you can, because that's the best way of keeping the union intact, which is a meta point, but I do think that we need more devolution, that we do need to do it in a way that just decentralises more. The education, it is a difficult one. I'm not going to play the lead card because I can't, because I'm not a politician. You know what I feel? I think education is due for a big shake-up, and I think the whole VAT on private schools issue will shake up the education system. I'm not saying new state schools will suddenly emerge, but I think there's a new settlement that might come about, which might just make it easier for people in rural areas to access education in a different way. Was your third question about high-tech jobs? Was that the question? In terms of whether they can be based in rural communities?
Opportunities for high-tech jobs.
Yeah, I mean, one of the many companies I worked for over the years was called Vodafone, which in its heyday was the biggest company in the UK. It was based in Newbury. You looked out the windows and there were fields. So, it was based in Newbury because it was much cheaper than London. People were attracted to Newbury as a magnet. I can't see any reason why you couldn't have high-tech hubs outside cities. But again, it comes back to the earlier point, talk about transport. It all depends on having the transport that then links it all together.
And connectivity, digital connectivity.
Sorry, yeah.
Because that's going to be a big thing needed for any high tech.
In the post-COVID world, definitely, yes.
I must admit, I'm a big fan. You know, you mentioned just a bit ago. You know, if you was in Hull, would you need an agricultural college, for example? But there are absolutely places where, you know, the UTCs, the University Technical Colleges, that might, you know, look at blue-green engineering. So engineering that I've talked about in terms of management of land, I think they are remarkable. And I know for a fact that there are a lot of people from the Isle of Axholme, as you mentioned, who go to the UTC in Doncaster, and you know, they focus on, as I say, blue-green engineering, but also digital. And that, as you know, again, unlocks potential of those children, and you can see that they're going into those sort of professions going forwards. And what you need to think about then is the circular economy and how that then plays back to creating those hubs, those technical hubs in the countryside, where they can come back to and have those, you know, amazing careers and jobs. So I can see more and more of that happening, particularly with devolution as well. So. Yeah.
I think it's the second time. I think there are opportunities, and we need to make sure the countryside seizes them and has opportunity to seize them. Yeah. Right. What next? The lady there on.
My name's Harriet Lamb from WRAP, the Waste and Resources Action Programme, and I just wondered if the panel could give some views about how we can best support the food and drink sector, including farmers, to make the shift to regenerative agriculture. We're not going to meet our zero carbon targets unless we do that, and how best can we support them and make sure it's not the small farmers who fall out of the system.
Thank you. Gentleman, where's that? Oh, then.
Hi, thank you. So my name's Jacob Allen. I represent as a councillor a village in East Sussex, but I can't afford to live in the village that I represent. I can't live alongside the people I represent. And so how do we address the cost of living and the cost of buying and renting in rural areas, especially in the southeast?
Thank you. And there's a gentleman, sorry, just by you know.
Thank you. William Perrin from rural Oxfordshire and before that rural Northamptonshire. If you go back 20 years to the Affordable Rural Housing Commission in 2005, it's a phenomenal piece of work, and it said that on farm sites we should classify them as brownfield sites and essentially just let rip on building that. And that was before Foot and Mouth? Yes, no, after Foot and Mouth. And now you see across many southern England, essentially concrete wastelands where there used to be livestock. Rotting Dutch barns, cow sheds, pig sheds, all falling down, and nothing can be built on them because concessions on planning on farm sites have had to be extracted one tooth at a time from the government, and the recent Class Q changes were accelerated, but there's a long way from that vision of the Rural Housing Commission. Huge potential in those brownfield sites, if the community agrees, of course, but in many communities they will, because that is a place where you could build affordable housing in the locations where people might want to live. So that's more of a statement than a question. Sorry about that. My question is: do you think we should go back to the 2005 Affordable Rural Housing Commission?
That's the last one passed. Jerry, do you want to kick off?
Yes, and yes. I just think that without that kind of plan, and to be fair to the new government, I think on this they are probably talking the right talk. Bit too early to say if they can walk the right walk, but I think in terms of ambition, that is there. Whether it is implementable, I think is another matter. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before, and I think really there needs to be a big kind of PR exercise here. Really, I would say that, wouldn't I? Because that's like half of the business I'm in. But I think that there needs to be a big campaign of the sort that we've actually seen the party already do to target rural voters. You know, during the election you had Steve Reed out there talking about England's green and pleasant lands, Britain's green and pleasant lands, and saying, you know, this is a point of pride for us as a country, this is about patriotism, we need to look after our rural areas and countryside because it is the right thing to do and it's in our hearts as Britain. And I think you can do a similar kind of, you know, pride in our communities campaign, which targets housing very, very I was going to say easily. It's not that the campaign would be easy, but I think that would be well received, is what I'm trying to say. So yes, I think absolutely. I'm going to cannily dodge the question on the food and drink sector because it's not my area of expertise. I'm afraid that someone else will answer that far better than me. And what was the second one? Oh, that you can't afford to live where you represent. It's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? Maybe a donor could help you out. I don't know. But I think, you know, the only solution. I'm very, very pro house building kind of as a person. Is to build more houses. I'm really interested to see what the new rules on kind of building up look like. I think densifying areas is going to be one of the ways that we increase the amount of space available for people and actually allow them to stay in places for longer as well. You know, a lot of particularly in the southeast, I think, is that people outgrow, you know, 2-bedroom flats or something. If the new government are going to make it easier for people to put an extension on going up, well, that can only help. That is basically my view on it. Build all the houses. Yes, I'll stop there.
Okay, Simon.
The food and drink question, can we come back to that? Because I'm not sure I have anything. Do you want to just say again what the question was? Because I don't want to pretend to be an expert in something I'm not either.
Well, if we're going to reach our zero carbon targets, food and drink and the farming sector as a whole are a big chunk of that. So we've got to help people make the transition to zero carbon. Now, some of that can be about reducing meat, some of that can be reducing fertiliser and nitrates. There's a whole range of things. So it was, what can the government do to help support farmers to make that change? By the way, I'm a big fan of your podcast.
Oh, thank you. I didn't even mention it. You, my mum. It's
I mean, where can we listen to it again?
I do think you've got to make it possible for farmers who have small farms to be incentivised to do what you said. This is the problem, isn't it? So many farms are small and don't really run profitably. Anything that they feel is an imposition on them cost-wise is going to be a real problem. Look, on the housing issue, I just want to obviously echo what Jerry said. I know a village, particularly well in Wiltshire, where 3 times in a row a very sensible decision to build new houses got to the final part, and then it was, for different reasons, kind of stopped. So I do think Angela Rayner, if she's able to do what we hope she does, which is to kind of change the planning rules such that these things can happen, I think you might be able to live in your village again at some stage, because there's no reason why it shouldn't happen, actually. I'm quite optimistic that this housing issue should. It's not going to happen overnight. The grey belt piece is, as someone said earlier, important. And I'm going to read this commission piece. Is it available still online? Is it?
Yeah.
So it was ahead of its time, by the sounds of it.
Miles ahead of its time. Yeah. Mark Shuck-Smith and others.
Who was the chair of it?
I can't remember.
I want to say Eleanor Goodman.
Yes.
I wonder why he's there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Brownfield all farms.
Yes.
And then just let people build whatever they need.
Actually, at the end of the last government, the Labour government did a really good bit of work on some proposals to aid housing in building in rural areas, but change of government, they got lost in the whole situation. And one of the things actually we did try to lobby them to carry it over, so this is a good piece of work, should be implemented.
Not at all. So it is ambitious, you know. I have to say, you know, right the way back to the manifesto and what we promised there, right the way through to Angela's speech now, and what we're looking to do. You know, planning reform or planning change is you know, and what we're anticipating on doing is hugely ambitious, and it needs to be, doesn't it? Because we need to facilitate those homes being built and allowing people to move back to the places where, you know, they're born and they want to live and work and be amongst the community that they came from originally. So, on food and drink though, I think that there are examples out there now of best practice where we know that you can absolutely support with reducing carbon, have a really successful farming business and supply of food, you know, to mass population. And great example of that, Bird's Eye working with Sustainable Landscapes over in the East Riding, which you all know really, really well, having written for the Yorkshire Post. There is They worked with 40 farmers back in the supply chain. So if you think about it, big business, bird's eye, peas, I should have said, working with lots of small farming communities with the right thought leadership pushed in there just to support. Yeah, they've started to look at growing different cover crops in between normal peat harvests. So going from a traditional kind of farming of peas to looking at the kind of cover crops that you can put in between harvests that improves soil, organic matter. So looking at what you're talking about, nitrates and so on. That cover crop, for every 1% improvement in soil organic matter, it holds back an extra 200 tonnes of water per hectare, so it helps with flooding. It sequestrates significantly more carbon, but it is also something that ultimately can be used to be, it's saleable, so you can sell that as well. So in between pea harvests, there's also another potential income. So there's opportunities out there, and that you might have heard of sponge cities, and this is about creating that big sponge around the city. So it's absolutely doable, but it needs kind of people to know what examples are already out there, and then those examples build credibility, and then more people are brave enough to think of it differently and trial different things out. So it's absolutely doable, but we were early stages, I think, of thinking differently around carbon sequestration. So.
I think there's a real opportunity there, you're absolutely right, but I also think with the change of government, it might be a bit early to say, but looking at ALMS, all the land management schemes as well, they haven't really got going very well. We saw this massive underspend over the last government in that area, and it will pick up as more people apply, but they need examples, they need inspiration, what they can do within their farm to support that move to regen ag.
I think, sorry, I might ask a question just following on from that. Following on from the question around food and drink, on that, a reference was made to meat consumption, and Jerry was also talking about kind of not falling into any traps when it comes to the Labour Party. The Countryside Alliance is actually engaged in a huge campaign nationally, getting councils to sign up to effectively a policy where they would source local ingredients wherever possible, local produce at their events, and that ranges from council events to civic events, whilst also using their platforms to promote the importance of buying British produce, including meat and dairy. And we actually launched that campaign because there is a growing number of councils that are moving in a different direction, and they're opting to ban meat and dairy. Now we're seeing this happen in the main in city sort of urban authorities, and I think one of the questions I'd like to ask, although I think it would probably be more directed at Lee, sorry Lee, is
still very lucky.
Is what steps can you take in Parliament to kind of not allow urban councils to bring in policies which are going to have a knock-on effect to rural Labour organisations, because obviously it's incredibly unpopular. So if Nottingham City Council, if they brought in policy to ban meat and dairy, it's not had a very good reception, obviously, and it's certainly not good in the countryside. It's going to set you back with rural voters. So I just want to ask what steps you can take to try and have a sensible conversation about that, and not fall into rabbit traps of culture wars around meat and dairy.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's a few things that I can absolutely do. I think the first thing is, whenever we have this, I think hearts and minds is massively important. Yeah, and I, the way that I want to go about my politics is about just that. So it's about understanding the stories, which I've talked a lot about today, but which is the hearts piece. But the minds piece is just as important. So the data, the facts, the figures, the evidence, all of that, is vitally important. So I guess the first thing that I can absolutely do is make sure that I totally understand the situation based on facts from people like yourselves, from people like the NFU, from other places as well, to pull that in. I would also say that, and we've alluded to it earlier, there are more Labour MPs in rural communities now than there've ever been. I mean, it's a big mass population there, so there's an opportunity for me to pull us together and have those debates and have those discussions, and then make sure that we are talking to the right people within government that we need to. there's opportunities through the DEFRA select committees and so on to be able to influence that. And then I guess the other thing that I will look into is just is around all party parliamentary groups, and the opportunity there to make sure that we feed in this discussion, have the debate, and then have a look at what we need to do in terms of policy areas going forwards.
Joe, do you have any comments on that?
Only to say that is a growing trend, and actually is something that I've done some reporting on. And the feedback that I got when I did that reporting was that actually it didn't have public support. The kind of the responses that we got when we covered these stories about councils that were banning meat and dairy, it wasn't supported by the public, and I would have been very interested to see the kind of impact assessment or the consultations that went on at the time, if any did happen, to go ahead with that. But again, it comes back to that kind of thing I was saying earlier about local national clash, right? You know, Mo, your question was, what can you do? Well, potentially not much if you're going to push all this decision making out to local councils, right? And how much do you want national government to get involved in deciding whether councils can serve sausage rolls? I don't know, but you know, it's a conversation that needs to be had, I suppose.
Thank you, Simon. Have you got anything you'd like to
Just to say, I think the idea of an organised group of rural Labour MPs is a fantastic idea, because, as you say, it's a big chunk of the Parliament, and you'll have shared interests and shared concerns and more power to your elbow, because I think it's exactly the right thing to do.
Absolutely. It's a great opportunity, like to ourselves and other rural groups, to come to and share our expertise and learn from you guys what's going on, what the concerns are that you have.
I agree, totally agree. Yeah.
Sorry, any more questions? The gentleman.
My dark culture war, I'm quite an advocate of the right to roam. You've got access to the countryside. I only think 8% of the countryside that can be generally accessed, and 3% of rivers. So, and I thought the Labour Party was sort of going to roll forward with rather like the Scottish model of access, and same access to quite a lot of European countries. So where do you think we might, now we've got a lot of rural MPs, might they be edging to placate farmers and also allow general access to land? Gamekeepers won't like it either.
I can answer that based on all of my knowledge at the moment, which is absolutely that the Scottish model is well liked, it's been well shared and well understood, and that is absolutely the plans that we were intending to move forward with. So, having said that, yeah, and I want to be honest as well, we do, regardless of anything that you put in place, you do need to understand the impact that will have, and we need to do that. We need to provide assurances to, all of our rural communities and our farming communities that it's not going to create any risks for them, or if there are any, that they're mitigated appropriately. Yeah.
I think well-managed access is a benefit for the countryside, and I think it's not just about free-for-all, it's about understanding about rights and responsibilities, that if you want that access, there is a responsibility that comes with it, and have respect for those communities who live and work there at the same time.
You have to say as well, didn't you? Post-COVID, the amount of during COVID and lockdown, when people could get out to walk and start to really re-engage with their local areas and their rural communities in particular, that created this whole new generation that wanted to get out and be there, and it started much more. We've seen swimming in rivers, outdoor swimming increase significantly, haven't we, over the last few years, and that has then led to an understanding and appreciation of the environment as well, and what we need to do to improve it. So it has other kind of indirect benefits in terms of more eyes and ears that are out there seeing where nature is and so on, and then can influence change as well. So it has a lot of benefits, but as I say, we just need to manage any risks associated with that too.
Managed access, open access?
I don't actually, if I'm honest.
Nor do I.
Last couple of questions, and then we're heading towards 3, so we need to finish up. So, gentlemen here.
Just going to say, as a Scot who benefits from open access
good to know.
at all times, it actually creates very few problems for us. I work in the rural sector and the forestry sector, and it's people understand it now. It's taken time, but people understand it. People are generally respectful, but we don't have the same population pressure that you have.
Yes, yeah.
And that's where the crunch points come. The issues that we have tend to be on the verges of communities, larger communities and towns. That's where we get the damage. That's where we get the livestock issues with wolves and everything else. But it actually works quite well.
I say you saw that during COVID, and you know, you saw the pictures of the landscape being turfed up, where the footpath had been, you know, so many people had been treading on it, and then they took it edge down to the field. So it is that kind of just that population pressure that is an issue.
Just to add a question into that as well. I attended a conference in London recently about global carbon sequestration projects, and one of the questions there was, or one of the points made there was that sub-Saharan Africa, they have a huge problem with loss of people from the rural population. So people want their children to become nurses or doctors or school teachers or lawyers or whatever they may be. So they don't have to live and work in the environment that their parents had. Bizarrely, we have exactly the same position in rural Britain, where there is that loss of population from the Glens of Scotland, the valleys of Wales. There is that population loss because people can't see that future of good quality, well-paid jobs. How do we change that? How do we see that changing? What can we do to give people more confidence that staying in the rural areas is something we want to do?
Sorry, I wasn't going to speak. I just came along to the event out of interest, but you've talked on a really important subject here. I mean, I've owned an SSSI in West Sussex. We've got Shell Duck. It's biodiversity top tier. You make that open access, it'll all die. It's next to a busy village. Everybody will walk their dogs there. Everything will be destroyed. In Scotland, I go to Scotland a lot. I love being up there. I love the emptiness of the Highlands. But it's a different world from a very highly crowded southern England. You go open access in southern England, there'll be no wildlife left. Nothing.
Yep. So, I mean, I think that's the point, isn't it? You need to, as I said, you need to understand the risks, and SSSI. We do need to protect our most beautiful and protected areas too. So I don't disagree at all. So just to be clear on that, absolutely don't disagree. It is about managing the risks. So in terms of rural populations moving into cities, or that kind of cultural push that's starting to happen, so that is being seen globally. So I've done some work a few years ago with the Rockefeller Foundation, who looked at the 100 resilient cities across the world, and particularly worked with Miami, Cape Town, Amman in Jordan, and Mexico. And Mexico is really interesting because it's, it was a lake that's no longer there, and there's so many 30 million people in a very, very small space. And but what we're finding is, you're right, a push for people to move out. So the thing that I see as making a difference there is around technology, communication systems, IT availability, because you should be able to work now pretty much anywhere in the world without needing to necessarily move into a city. So I mean, I live in a relatively rural area myself, and for the last 5-6 years prior to becoming an MP and having to go to London a lot, I was absolutely working from home, as a director of Europe, and I feel I could do a pretty successful job with my global team as well. So it's absolutely doable, but you need the right infrastructure in place to allow that, and that's a whole different kind of piece of work that we need to do in terms of like the digital world in the future.
But I also think we need to stimulate good quality rural jobs.
Agreed.
You can work
Agreed.
a city job from a valley in Wales. But it's about creating these good quality rural jobs.
No, I agree.
It's vitally important for that landscape.
No, agreed. Absolutely agreed. And GB Energy, renewables, all gives us the opportunity to do that. But as I say, that also needs managing in terms of risk, because we want to use land appropriately and manage land appropriately. So,
Well, thank you everyone. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to draw this fringe to a close. But just ask our speakers whether got any final departing words. I know we've covered education, jobs, housing, access. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I suppose for me, our countryside is just amazing, isn't it? And it is just, it's stunning. We need to look after it, but we need to also make it a place where we can work and thrive. So, for me, I want to be somebody that absolutely champions our countryside in Parliament, and I think there is an opportunity with the number of people there now with the same kind of thoughts and ideas to bring that together to align it. So.
Fantastic, thank you, Lee. Jerry?
I think very, very briefly, on this and so many other issues, the real kind of crunch point for this new government is going to be in the delivery, but it actually goes further than that. what I would, not to do too much self-promotion, but do get a subscription to the Times if you don't have one, because I wrote in the Times just a couple of weekends ago about this idea that's being discussed at top levels of government, which is the death of deliverism. And this is essentially the theory that it doesn't matter anymore just to deliver. People have to feel like you're delivering. And they're seeing it in America, where, you know, actually things have improved economically quite a lot, but no one believes it. So that is a really hot topic that's being discussed kind of in the top corridors of power. And it applies to rural communities in the countryside as well. It is not just enough for this government to be able to say, well, look, we have done it. People have to feel and believe that it has been done. And if that is not possible, then the project will fail. I'm back with the harbinger of doom.
Thanks, Jerry. Simon?
Very, very briefly, I think there's a lot to play for in this new government. I think we've identified some policy areas that are possibly achievable. We've identified a kind of an agenda which reconnects the cities and rural communities in the longer term. Let's stop using the phrase levelling up. It never really was authentic, and let's talk about social mobility. Let's talk about how we can actually encourage, this gentleman's question, people who do well at university and college to come back to rural communities and to have well-paid jobs and affordable housing. That's the golden combination.
It is the golden combination. You know, we want to see a living, thriving countryside, and that doesn't mean, it does mean houses, it does mean the countryside needs to play its part. We do need to bring jobs to the countryside. It's not just going to dip an aspect in this kind of chocolate box villages, because it will just wither on the vein and die, and that's not the countryside I want to know, or the countryside that I support. So thank you all today. If you can't only do a few things today, that is listen to Simon's podcast, sign up to the Times.
And give me a chance.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, Jerry.
Has this discussion been recorded?
It has. We'll put it on our website tomorrow, hopefully. I've got to download it from my phone, so give me a break.
And you don't mind if we come back to you?
No, absolutely, absolutely.
Cool.
Thank you, everyone.